We have a little fun now. I'm going to pick on you guys a bit and ask you to handicap what we just talked about, how you see. We won't hold you to it. We realize Donald Trump's at 1% when his baby started a year ago in June. So, but how do you see, Screven, let's start with you. How do you see this thing in the final result?
I think I'm going to go contrary to something I said in the last segment, and I think this ends up, I think Hillary pulls away. I mean, there's some people that speculate that Florida may not be in play by the end of this thing, but I predict Hillary Clinton wins larger than expected.
David, I'm going to go to you. Is there any chance Trump can possibly win without Florida?
Yes, there is. It would be a Rust Belt strategy that he would have to win definitely Ohio. He would have to do probably handle Virginia as well, keep North Carolina, not lose any of the states that are in that sort of a swing scenario as we go right now, but he's going to have to outperform what he has performed in the Rust Belt to date as far as the polling goes. There is time. There is time.
Steve, is there time for that to happen, and that Trump wins without Florida?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a long ways between now and Election Day. I think we're going to come out of the conventions. The race is going to tighten, and what happens at that pivot point is going to determine where we end up. I think the first debate here may be more important than any debate we've ever had. If Trump can't pass the basic test of being president in that first debate, which is entirely possible he won't, you could see a landslide, of 84, 72, 64 proportions. If he comes out of that first debate and it's close, we could it could be a pretty interesting election.
Does your polling, Ryan, show that if it is, let's say it's a devastating one-way result and Clinton wins big, how does that affect down ballot in Florida, do you think, based on what you've seen so far early on in the type of ballot?
When you get to a statewide race like a U.S. Senate, it could have a detrimental impact, no doubt about that one bit. It's hard to run away from the top of the ticket candidate like that statewide. When you start getting into congressional, state, Senate, legislative, the awareness of the voters for who those candidates are starts to drop off. There's a chance for down ballot Republicans to be able to work really hard on the ground, define themselves before they're defined, get into voters at voters' doors, get to know what they're targeting, who it is that they got to persuade. I'm not sure it's as bad down ballot if candidates are working hard, but it could be.
Unless there's an undervote that we talked about in the last segment. If you get Republicans just disinterested in staying home, then it could have that effect.
Well, you mentioned the U.S. Senate race. I'm just going to guess, I know all four of you know everybody that's running, but my guess is that very few voters in Florida have any idea who's running. David, who's running?
Oh, right. Name ID is at a premium here, and there are regional candidates as of this juncture. There are 5 Republicans running. You've got Congressman Ron DeSantis from Northeast Florida. You've got Carlos Baruf, home builder from Sarasota. We've got Todd Wilcox, who is a businessman and former military from Orlando. David Jolly, congressman, won a special election against Alex Sink from Tampa Bay, and the Lieutenant Governor, Carlos Lopez Cantera from Miami. So you have a very interesting geographic difference at this point where they're known perhaps in their own areas, especially in the case of the 3 electeds, versus anyone that has any type of statewide presence. They really don't. They're in a battle for that right now, and of course the voting for that will start in late July for the August 30th primary when the
Some people have equated this U.S. Senate race to the barroom scene in Star Wars. You know, you have a lot of people, little crazy, little fringe candidates, but I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be one of the negative races on our side, on the Democratic side, where we have 2 candidates that both will have money. I think it'll be extremely negative, which we'll see if that hurts us, come general election time. But again, back to the previous discussion, I do believe in this race, the top of the ticket, the presidential race is going to have a dramatic effect.
I got to ask everybody at the table here, because this is what you guys do for a living. You're a political strategist. A lot of people ask me over my 40 years as a reporter with the AP, how come, everything's negative, and that seems to work. What would happen? Is there ever going to be a day and age in our lifetime and for the voters that you can watch positive campaigns?
It depends on the race. It's interesting. I was involved in Gwen Graham's campaign for Congress in the last election. What was fascinating about that race in our focus groups is the more positive we kept the race, the better off we were. But that is a departure from almost everything we've ever been involved with. For example, in the governor's race last year, and I'm sure Ryan probably tested this, every time that my candidate Charlie Crist tried to go positive, we actually went the wrong way in the polls. It actually took negative messaging to actually drive enthusiasm. And I think that unfortunately that's a symptom of the cynicism in the country at large.
And people forget there's been negative campaigning in this country since we were founded. People want to say this is something new. They say these races aren't anything compared to some of the races back.
But there's no social media 24/7
Well,
talk shows. There's a lot of differences.
A lot of differences.
I would offer, too, that we need to remember, especially at the top of the ticket, you're going to see a candidate in Donald Trump who's going to take negative campaigning, not from a committee, not from an outside group. He's going to do it himself. Get ready for it. It's going to be historical to see a candidate.
Isn't that one of his attractions?
For a lot of voters, it is.
genuineness?
For a lot of voters, it
in a
is.
Republican primary situation, it certainly was. But I go back to, take away the Twitter, because one intemperate tweet, one really, really wrong thing when he wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning and he gets mad at something that somebody said on Morning Joe or on CNN, and you lose that small percentage of those that are trying
Well,
to
he's
decide.
had a few of those already.
Well, he's
And I think the biggest challenge for Trump really is he has to prove to general election voters who are just now starting to pay attention in a real way that he can be president. That's the first challenge for a guy like him. And he has one or two moments and he can lose those voters from the very beginning.
If you alienate women, you alienate young voters, you alienate Hispanics, you can't put the pieces together to win a presidential race.
Well, leading into the convention, it also makes you wonder how the convention is going to roll. We're going to see a version of the '68 Democratic Convention in Chicago and Cleveland as an example. I mean, how hot is this fire right now, particularly in the Republican Party?
With Trump as the presumptive nominee, now he'll work hand in glove with the RNC. His team will with the RNC to put on the show of the convention. The run of the convention will be about Trump and trying to get past some of the stereotypes that have been fostered about him, and he has helped foster himself up to this point. So the convention's a reset. A lot of people look at this, and we talked about this, nuclear launch codes. We're going to have to be able to trust Donald Trump with nuclear launch codes. Put him in the White House in October of 1962. What would he have done? Would he have listened to the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Would he have pursued every option otherwise to blockade? That's how we have to look at every single person running for president. It's not all about economic policy. It's not about social issues. It's about commanding the nuclear forces and the greatest military force in the world.
Or would he have said, "You're fired"?
I don't even believe he did.
We've referred to Trump's 1% in June of 2015, when at the time I believe Jeb was probably doing his kickoff down in Miami.
Right.
With all the money in the world and all the endorsements of the major Republican figures in the country for the most part. What in the world, David, you would know, you've worked with the former Governor Bush and also Rubio, but what happened to the two formidable, or we thought they were formidable, Florida candidates in the Republican primary?
Trump. It's all about Trump. Trump was able to capture the alienated Republicans, the Republicans that have turned out and voted Republican year after year after year, and they haven't seen an appreciable change in their station in life. They're working hard. They're working as hard as they ever have, but they're not moving ahead. They don't like the direction of the country. Therefore, they want somebody that's going to tell them in very short staccato, 140 characters or less sound bites, that I'm going to fix it.
Also, though, I mean, historically, at least in probably the last 50 years, the party out of power often goes with somebody who's not in the establishment. My party in 2008, after my base said, we gave you Al Gore, we gave you John Kerry, we're not giving you Hillary Clinton, we want one of our own, somebody who we think we can win. I think Jeb Bush probably is guilty as much of just running in the wrong year. I think had he run in 2012, there's a decent chance he might have been the nominee. He might even beat Barack Obama if he could have gotten past the Bush family stuff. But it was just really a bad year for somebody with his pedigree to run.
It's interesting. David Brooks, of all people, it's almost come out and said he wished Obama could run for a third term, a conservative New York Times columnist. But it's interesting now that Obama's numbers have gone back up on the positive side. And I imagine that as well could play some factor come November.
What's the old Kevin White quote from the old Boston mayor said, "Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative." Obama looks better and better every day.
Is there an alternative at this point? I mean, third party, they're talking about third party. Is
The
it too
biggest
late?
problem with third party is ballot access in all of the states. That's a process that should have started. If you're going to do it seriously, it should have already started. So getting on the ballot with the canvassers and the petitions and whatnot, it's not as easy as just saying it out loud.
Was this the year for third-party candidates?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem with third-party candidates, though, is you have to get 270 electoral votes to be president. And I think that's part of what Bloomberg decided why he didn't run. If you don't get to 270, it goes to the U.S. Congress. And do you think we have a messed up election system today? Wait till our United States Congress picks our
Would
next
not work
president.
Make Florida look like
Well,
a
yeah,
cakewalk.
you live in Florida. It's hard. It's funny because if you talk to people that don't live in Florida, we've got a real reputation down here for running elections.
Which, by the way, the last time the U.S. Congress picked a president was because Florida couldn't count the votes in 1872. That's how we ended up with.
It's always
there would
Florida.
be folks that argue
Somehow
that,
it's always
that doesn't
Florida.
change a lot. But let's talk about that a little bit. Florida, people really watch the state real close, and I have a hunch if it's a close election this year, Florida will be right there in the.
Oh,
in the
absolutely,
public.
absolutely, and it's going to be about the party apparatus doing their turnout operations as well. Will the Florida victory operation for the Republican side be running at the same level that it has in the past? The funders, the people that put the money into these operations, are they going to continue to robustly fund the Republican ticket with vote by mail follow-up, with the phones, with the door knocks, with the things that win elections at the grassroots level, at the local level, and moving out to the top of the ticket, where I feel comfortable and confident that the Democrats will, because I believe what Steve and Screven were talking about, their return to the nominee, no matter who they were supporting in the primary, they're going to be back. I believe that they're going to have an easier path to unification than the Republicans do
Real
right
quickly,
now.
everybody's up in Florida in the legislature this year. The lines have been drawn, and not by the legislature. Do we see any opportunity, Screven, for the Democrats to pick up some seats
We
in the
will
House and the
absolutely
Senate?
pick up seats. Are we going to take control of the chamber in 16? No, but we will definitely pick up seats. It's going to be unprecedented. We have 43 new members of the House of Representatives that are coming in for the first time, 16 to 18 new senators. It's going to be a huge changeover in our legislature. And the Democrats, if you look at the way the state's changing demographically, we will be making gains as we approach the next reapportionment in 2020.
Republicans agree?
I have to agree that there will be some erosion of the Republican majority in both the House and most likely in the state Senate as well. I don't see, knowing where the seats are that are open, they're in Miami-Dade, they're in Central Florida, and speaking in the Senate right now, that's going to make the Hispanic turnout and the population changes in these new seats very challenging for the Republicans to hold.
And real quickly, talking about Miami-Dade, the younger generation of Cubans is becoming more Democratic, not nearly as Republican as Grandma and Grandpa. Is that right?
Very much the case. Very much the case. They, third generation especially, and then of course in Miami-Dade right now, at the last census we had in 2010, just under half of all the Hispanics that lived in Miami-Dade even claimed that they were Cuban. Non-Cuban Hispanics are starting to have an influx, much bigger share of the electorate down in Miami-Dade. And I want to say this on the note as we're talking about Republicans. You must do better with millennials. You cannot lose to them by a landslide. You've got to do better with non-whites. But most importantly, when you look at the female electorate, for the first time in our country's history, to my knowledge, single females will outvote married females as part of this electorate. And Republicans have got to start figuring out a way to talk to this part of the electorate, or it's going to be hard to put together general election vote math.
Steve, you got to like that. What you're hearing about more Democrats in the biggest county in the state. And
Well, I mean, you go back, and the Republicans have a demographic problem and frankly, a mortality problem in Dade County. When you look at first-generation Cubans that make up the Republican base, simply they're getting older and dying, and they're being replaced by younger Cubans and younger non-Cubans. Cubans will make up maybe only 40% of all Hispanics that vote in Florida this year, which is a huge change from where we were only 12, 15 years ago.
it's going to be fun to watch. I'm sorry.
Well, it's
Screven.
not only the Democratic rises, and Ryan's going to smile at this because we've talked about it for years, it's the MPAs. It's the people that are registering no parties. And they used to not vote because they were registered as part of motor voter. Now they're voting. And as they go, a lot of these elections will go.
Well, good to see people vote anyway. That's the whole idea. So, gentlemen, it was interesting and a very fast half hour, and thanks so much for joining us and sharing your
for having us.
experiences with us and your insight.